edition of Agritech Samvaad. I'm excited to have Siraj here in this panel discussion. Agritech Samvaad has been going on for now almost for a few months, and I had to stop that for a while due to just the work that's coming in, and I just couldn't take time out to do these dialogue sessions. But I've been missing it, and I'm very excited to do this with a very special guest today, who I think needs no introduction. He has a very illustrious a biography that's going to take time if I start delving into the details there. But nevertheless, I really want to just set a bit of a context of why we've named this Agritech Samvaad. Uh, so I've been working from the agriculture space a little more closely on since 2017. So I'm pretty much I would say a young uh, explorer or koji in this space when it comes to agriculture, trying to really understand what's happening in this space. And somewhere at this point now we are in this kind of a transition space where a lot of technological innovations are happening, and there is a much more questioning and concerns about the various kind of questions that are happening, various changes that are happening, be it at a policy front, be it technology front. And so I'm very keen to kind of also look at the bigger picture and at the same time explore what are the changes that are happening. So in that kind of exploration, I almost realized that the worlds of agritech, agriculture, and you added yesterday when we were chatting, agribusiness don't often talk with each other, right? It's like, you talk about agri-tech worlds, they talk about marketplace technology, number of millions of users, millions of funding, and you don't get to see what's happening on the ground. Whereas you talk to agriculture world, you hear MSP, you hear all policy discussions, you hear all kinds of discussions on the farm laws, but you don't get to see, what are the kind of business changes that are happening there. So in a certain way, the Agritech Samvaad is a way to see if the worlds of agritech, agriculture, and agribusiness can interact with each other, and learn about each other, and see what are the changes that are happening in the overall ecosystem. So that way, I'm very excited to have you, Siraj,
Thank
here.
you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So
Always.
before we really, get started there, I would really love to do this in a slightly informal way. And I know you've been doing a lot of interviews over the past few months. I almost see every day some other new updates about your interviews here and there happening in different forums there. But and you've spent almost several decades in this space. Uh, Oftentimes I often ask this question to the panelists who come into this question, that like, once you wake up in the morning and you feel driven to start your work, and if you were to really ask yourself, who's Siraj, what would be your answer be?
So, I didn't come into this space by choice. I kind of post my MBA, landed up in this role. I mean, in this sector
Mm.
by sort of default. I mean, I was in a multi-trade company, and I was put in the agri division, and that's how it happened. But the thing which kept me in there for over 30 years and which keeps me going is the whole purpose, the thought that whatever I do makes a difference, and whether it is and makes a difference to a large number of people. So it is not about making a difference to a few here. It is about what is happening till the food is produced. As also a large part of my career has been about what happens after the food has been produced, which
Mm.
means the ability to impact nutrition and hunger, but on the other side to impact productivity, to be part of an exercise or an effort where there is a large population which is dependent on it, and making things better for them does leave one with a certain satisfaction that one is at least it's not like saying that one is doing CSR. It is like
Mm.
integrating good work in your profession, and I think that's what keeps me going and keeps me excited about what I do.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting that you're saying this. It's not CSR, and this is always a question that I really struggle to ask. I mean, I really struggle to grapple with, because today a large portion of the conversations around agriculture deal with the complexity of the agrarian crisis in some sense, right? We have the latest data that's showing that the number of agriculture workers have increased, right?
Mhm.
And the incomes have been falling down, and almost all the incomes that are coming in are coming from more from non-agriculture than agriculture.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that is at one end, and at the other end, we've had almost a socialist preoccupation with agriculture for almost for several decades, until we moved, the economies liberalized, and it has had the impact there. So in that case, as somebody who is leading a CEO of a large company, what it is to be a capitalist in this space, uh, how do you see that? I mean, is it? I mean, I know it's almost sounds like a like an abuse word, right? Today the words, we are in a society in some sense like कि, तू धंधे कर रहा है क्या मेरे पे? We are in kind of the world where the trade is being looked at with suspicion, and we've had Hindi villains have all been traders. So in
You
that sense,
you've stolen my lines actually, because I've very often said this, that Indian agriculture historically has been a tripartite partnership between God, government, and the farmer.
mm,
And so God, and incidentally in Hindi, all three of them are called Annadatas,
mm,
and in different spaces. Because I mean everything depended on the sort of weather, the rainfall,
mm,
the government policies, and the farmer and how he produced. And
mm,
you're absolutely right. If you recall old Hindi movies, the trader was the exploiter of the farmer,
mm,
and so that has been the typical approach to agriculture in India, where the market has been seen as the exploiter of the farmer,
mm,
and the farmer has over a period of time, and it's very different now, but for a long period of time, seen what I call the pant wearing man as not to be trusted. Uh,
mm,
the city man or the city dweller
mm,
is someone who's come to con the simple countryman, a person.
mm,
So that image has to change, and that is where industry comes in. So there is a difference between, and I would want that difference to be highlighted, which is uh, so it is God, government, farmer, and historically it was trade, which is saying that there was a trader in the local market who would deal with the farmer. But now there is an industry, and that industry is a lot more organized, or I mean gradually getting more organized, has more people to answer to, both from the whole ESG, the way they conduct their business, governance,
mm,
fair trade, various global pressures. So I think that integration and that trust building has to be more. And typically, and I mean, in a country like India, the other challenge has been that given that agriculture provides, or the rural livelihoods or economy, comprises of almost 60% of the population, which in a democracy is a large vote bank also. So there is the whole politics also come in. I mean, so the decisions taken on agriculture often are driven by the political consequences included, and not necessarily purely for what is good for the farmer or the economy, or whatever. So that is a challenge that we face in a country where a large population depends on agriculture.
mm. No, I mean, uh, so you are talking about the question more was in terms of you're talking about it's not CSR, and at the same time, we have all these issues there.
So the industry has to be encouraged to. I mean, you need more capital to come into this space. And one of the
Mm,
deficiencies of Indian agriculture has been that capital has been seen with a negative lens. Now,
mm,
whether it was originally a trader's capital versus an industry's capital, trader, I'm meaning village level, Alatya or a Banya or whatever, who was. I mean, I'm not using that word from a negative perspective, but a person who trades
mm, mm,
essentially. But what has to be seen is the big industry connecting with the farmer,
mm,
and I mean, there is a need for safeguards so that the farmer interest is not compromised. But at the same time, without capital coming into the space, we will always be lagging behind. Whether it is about getting the right productivity, getting the right supply chain, or getting the right sort of infrastructure to go to the market and the marketplace.
mm. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the capital getting scarce there, and we've discussed this
Capital
earlier.
not finding agriculture attractive is
Mm,
the challenge, and which is because there are too many regulations there are too many the political consequences of people going there, and every time capital tries to get close to the farmer, it has often been seen as, are they exploiting the farmer?
Hmm. 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 Yeah, and we to come to the core topic here, which is warehousing. We did see the data and we did discuss this, right? There's almost now this phase where the the management businesses, the traditional collateral management businesses are dwindling down, and you see the warehouse receipt finance markets are coming down numbers in terms of the amount credits given for the collaterals. So in a certain sense, the whole idea of having this dialogue was also for me to get a sense of how this warehousing space is evolving itself in this new landscape, right? And we had the farm laws that were coming in. So so that's the area I want to really cover in this whole dialogue there. But before we start off with, I would love to really get a sense of your sense of how do you think, why do you think that whole warehousing finance, because for somebody, people who are not really clued to this industry, to say that the warehousing receipt finance market, traditional markets have come down by almost 50%, would seem a little more shocking, right? So in a sense, I would maybe if you could just explore a bit in terms of why do you think that kind of changes that are happening in this space, and what are the benefits that have happened because of that?
So if you look at a bit of history, which is about 15, 20, 15, 16 years old, which is that, the whole concept of before that period, typically the banks would give loan to people, and largely it was traders
Hmm.
who would have, commodity in their warehouse, and the bank would go and put a lock and key there, and take the, give funding to the trader whose warehouse they were sort of hypothecating or taking as collateral. But this was not like, you were not just packing goods there. There was a live commodity inside which got impacted by what elements were at play inside that warehouse. Could be pest, could be weeds, or whatever. There was deterioration, moisture evaporation, and all those things. So
Hmm.
I think there was realization that this needed to be managed more professionally and specifically, rather than like anything else. I mean, if you couldn't have the same approach to having a warehouse full of suitcases or
Hmm.
shoes and of cashew nuts, right? Because 3 months storage would have different bearing on the three categories. So the concept of collateral management came in, where the banks engaged with agencies, and there were NCML, the organization that I worked for, also was basically was the pioneer in this space. Actually, we were the biggest, we were the first, and we were the biggest. Where the bank said that, okay, you look after these warehouses, and please fumigate them, check on them, and all that, and we will sort of consider it as under our collateral. I mean, these are collateral to the loans that we've given, and you are managing that,
Hmm.
and for a fee, which was a sort of very small percentage of the total value that was in stock. Now, this worked well for a certain period of time, I would say about 10 years. And typically at the time of, I would say, demonetization, given that the rural economy is a lot cash sort of engaging, we had a situation where there were a certain number of defaults and people ran away with their material and stuff like that. And the banks came after the collateral managers. And obviously, as per the agreement, we had, and us and many other people had to compensate the banks for people running away with the material or material deteriorating, or in certain cases there was complicity between the bank and the borrower, and but the sort of um, uh, the sort of cost of it was borne by the collateral holders.
Hmm.
Insurance agencies which were providing insurance for this also realized that this was a no go, and gradually started withdrawing. So today, the warehouse receipt financing under collateral management is at about 50% of what it was at its peak in 2017 or so, and it is not likely to get better because one, the insurance doesn't insure you against that risk. The second is that you have an unlimited liability. So I have a limited fee as my earning or as my reward, and the full crop value as my liability. And now typically in anywhere in the world, you would have a certain say that, so that if I'm getting X fee, my liability is 8 times the fee, 10 times the fee, 6 times the fee, whatever. I mean, simple example is how you deal with the dry cleaning industry, or right. I mean, nobody replaces your garment cost or whatever. However, I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's how this business is done. And the NPAs in this industry also are not very high. I mean, when I compare this sector with the general NPAs in the industry, this is like hardly 1%. And but the banks, because there was no organized collateral management recognition, I mean, the RBI didn't recognize the collateral manager. There was no sort of proper association or registration of collateral managers. So I mean, all kinds of people became collateral managers. So this industry, which was, I think, very critical for agri financing, was kind of left to the mercy of how the banks treated them, and how people saw this as an opportunity for quick buck or whatever. So what the situation that we have today is really that all the old players, the established players, have started getting out of it. I mean, just for example, I mean, NCML used to be having assets under management which were close to about over 20,000 crores. I mean, at its peak, it was like 27,000 crores. And today we do like 2,000 crores. And frankly speaking, I don't want to do this business, because why should I be putting my sort of organization at risk for earning that little money? So if the bank agri financing has to be encouraged, there has to be more order and equality brought into this equation. And my bigger concern on this is, and this is linked to warehousing, that the government today is setting up this, or has set up this agri infrastructure fund, which encourages people to build warehouses in rural areas. And essentially the purpose of warehousing is really for the farmer to get funding against his crop. I mean, nobody keeps their crop for the sake of keeping it, unless I mean, the farmer produces and sells, but the only reason he stores is when he sees a higher value coming in the future. And to sustain that, he needs to borrow, and that is the carrying cost, as we call it. And if that collateral management business is not supported in a more organized and a equitable manner, all this infrastructure can actually yield nothing, because you would have warehouses, I mean, capital invested in these spaces with really nowhere to go.
No, and you're bringing a very interesting point with respect to the government's not recognizing the collateral managers, right? Because when I was digging into the policy frameworks, right, I realized that while the government has changed the regulations in terms of Section 8 of Banking Regulation Act, but to a large extent, bartering and lending on commercial goods is still kind of frowned upon. So, do you think that has also contributed to the way the entire collateral management business has been ignored from that space in terms of formal recognition?
I think collateral management business actually didn't have a formal launch. It was really one bank saying that, okay, why don't you provide me this service, right? It was I mean, I would say an unregulated private arrangement between the bank and the collateral management service provider, or the warehouse manager, in a way. And then it kind of expanded. People found solutions, and kept expanding. But today, till today, each bank has a separate agreement with a collateral manager. So there is no to say that, okay, this is the policy around collateral management. So I mean, it is my desperation to get business from the bank, or bank's comfort in dealing with me. Those are the elements that are still determining it. I think this industry is too critical, and particularly for rural development and the whole agri sector, to be just left to banks and companies having their private arrangements and trying to get in and get out of it.
Yeah, and I think which brings to the central part, right? I mean, when NCML changed its name from National Collateral Management to Commodity Management, you almost made a very prophetic sort of, which I've been, as I told you, like I written an article called "The Death of a Collateral Manager," where I actually included this quote of yours, where you say that from a branding perspective, it might appear as a small change from collateral to commodities. But in the life of our business and our presence of our overall agriculture industries, it's a great leap.
Right.
So now you took over NCML after a wonderful tenure at Cargill. And at this stage, when all of these changes are happening, what is your state of mind when you sort of announce this and you started envisioning the future of NCML?
And in fact, that's what actually excited me. That I this is a space which always existed,
Mm,
but it was all very brick and mortar. It
mm,
was NCML has physical presence through its warehouses in about 750 locations in the country. Right,
mm,
we have 2,000 feet on the ground in terms of people manning these warehouses and offering various services. We have 4,500 automatic weather stations around the country.
mm,
We monitor prices around of from 2,500 mandis across the country for over 340 various commodities and uh, varieties of commodities.
mm,
Now, this is an organization which has so much steeped in this rural landscape.
mm,
But what was missing and what has come on now is the linkage of all these things through technology. And that is where I see the opportunity for NCML, which is saying that an organization which has presence in weather intelligence to crop intelligence, a warehousing system which is widespread across the country, and actually it's not warehouses in the cities but warehouses in deep, I mean these are all warehouses which are close to the mandis, right? A price monitoring system, a testing and sampling, inspection and testing business, which actually reassures the people, the participants in the market, of the quality that is being bought and sold, a market yard platform, and a financing business. So it is actually a complete presence, or a full presence in the complete value chain for agriculture. I think what is needed is, and this is where I am excited, and I was keen on pushing NCML forward, and with the name change and everything, is that we have the wherewithal to convert to reality all
mm.
that is being talked about as what can be done with the agri value chain.
And would you also attribute this with this sort of change with the technological impetus, with the parent, which is the Fairfax Group, also taking much more emphasis on the role of
Yes.
technology?
I mean, when Fairfax invested in this business, that was their, I would say, aim, which is
I see.
to
Yeah.
essentially push the agriculture infrastructure. I mean, one of the activities I haven't talked about what NCML does is NCML is building in a private-public partnership project with FCI,
Mm,
building silos, and these
mm,
are silos in production areas of Punjab and Haryana, with railway tracks, and silos in consumption areas of UP and Bihar,
mm,
which is going to transform. And a number of other players are also participating in that exercise, but we are one of the biggest, where we are building silos with complexes with railway tracks inside them, that would change how grain is stored and moved by the government.
mm,
Uh, Putting an end to a long-standing complaint of how much grain is wasted, and the high transportation and management costs of grain storage by the government. So if these things play out right, I think that whole ecosystem is going to modernize and bring significant efficiency. And
mm,
and while I talk about what this project does for the government, the discovery or the realization that we are having is that the moment you set up this modern storage facility with the railway connectivity, you actually bring to life that rural economy. I mean,
mm,
suddenly, this whole thing of accessing markets for local produce, container loading, all those things come into play. So, I mean, all these centers actually have potential to become primary processing centers, or
mm,
local good storage centers, transportation. So it is about, and so this is also linked to the first question that you asked me about what excites me and what I think about waking up. I mean, this all these centers have the potential to infuse life into
mm.
rural economies across a large part of the country.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where I would maybe go back a little bit of in history also, right? I mean, this argument that that once you invest in infrastructure, that leads to a capital formation, and which leads to further multiplier effect. Right? This argument has been placed, historically for a very long time in the Indian agriculture scenario, and we almost see that. See, if you go back to historical data, you see that the amount of agriculture infrastructure, after the 90s, when the Indian liberalization happened, the infrastructure spending dipped actually, right?
Right.
Until then, you see the increase in there, and it started dipping in. So it is almost now with the infrastructure fund, with now with DFIs planning to come in and all of that, it is almost there's been a big gap here, right?
Yeah.
from this 91 period to almost like this 2008 period, when after the UPA government started coming in and started investing on the agri credit and all of that.
Right.
So, in what slightly going back at history, why do you think this we sort of missed the earlier bus when it comes to spending on infrastructure from the agri standpoint?
So in the first part, and as you rightly said, most of the agri infrastructure was built by the government, right? All
Mm,
the central warehousing corporation, and the whole stuff. The reason is that the private, see, agri is not a very high margin business. It's a high
mm,
volume business, but it's not a high margin business. Now, for the private sector to invest, and this was my sort of standard sort of concern and conversation in Kargil also, that the guy who builds plants
mm,
is the one who gets crucified, and his successors and later generations reap the benefit of it, because these are large investments which have long period returns.
mm,
And in a world where people are looking at quarterly results for determining success, it requires a lot of courage to do this. What
mm,
has changed is that now we have a lot more risk capital coming in, which is
mm,
taking a longer term view of the sector. And so today you have people talking about, we will be this in 10 years, and we will be that in 10 years or 5 years or whatever. It's a very welcome sign, and I'm very happy that this is happening, because if you had an industry which said, okay, I want to see this in 3 months and 6 months and 1 year, some of these things would never happen.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, and that's where also, in some sense, for a longer time, the warehousing space was more real estate business. Given the kind of dynamics that were playing out, and
Right.
it took almost long time to. I think now with the risk capital, probably we are seeing that it could be more than a real estate business, right?
Right. Absolutely. And the new sort of warehousing that would come up would logically and should be more closer to what the market wants, and
Hmm.
essentially a balance between what the market wants and the farmer and what the farmer does, rather than just a static place to store goods.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think this is where it gets very interesting to talk about WTRA,
Yeah.
because it started off in 2007 with regulating the entire warehousing ecosystem there, and then it almost it went through its slow change, and now we are seeing some amount of work happening in the regulating space there. So while we're talking about the entire evolution of with the farm laws and all of that, in hindsight, to what extent do you see the WTRA becoming relevant in this context there? Because at one level, WTRA came in with a need to see how do we to build a grid and all of that, right? And so now at this standpoint, how do you see these developments that have happened so far?
So, from my perspective, I think WTRA has taken a very long time for the period
Mm,
that it has been there, and we need to understand that what is holding it back. I mean, a concept which is good and not taking off requires introspection to say that, okay, why is it not happening? So,
mm,
I mean, so who uses? I mean, where are the WTRA accredited warehouses? They are essentially the warehouses which the government uses or the exchanges use
mm,
for their SEBI required deliveries or whatever. So now the reason is that for collateral management, the banks don't want to pay for that service. The warehouse manager does not want to pay for that service. I mean, it's like I mean, and some of those things are very basic. It's like saying that if I'm NCML as a company and I manage 750 warehouses, do I need to have 750 WDRA registration? Why can't it be one WDRA registration,
mm,
right? So that I think some of and the fact that it has still got such a low enlistment, despite it being the right concept,
mm,
is a sign that and the thing is that there is a cost to doing this. Now, in a very low margin business, why would someone get pay an extra cost,
mm,
particularly for a warehouse manager? And the banks are saying that we don't need it. If you are wanting it, then you might as well get it at your cost. So the borrower doesn't want to pay that cost. The lender doesn't want to pay the cost. Why should
mm,
the store guy pay the cost? And my take is that it's like I think the government, the regulator needs to bear the cost. I mean, that is the
mm,
way it should be. I mean, if we want to regulate something, then we need to pay the cost of it.
Hmm. Yeah, and it is very interesting because and we did discuss this, right? Like that at one level, because I was when I was looking at the WDRA data there, it's almost very clear that the number of WDRA accredited warehouses beyond a point are not increasing, right? Which is a clear indicator of the market signals that you're talking about, which is like that
Absolutely.
nobody is willing to pay the cost, and so you having the private players who are wanting to, who are have some maybe some parts of the warehouse where they deal with the public one, go for WDRA, but largely they are still going beyond that, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
so now to come to the to more specific aspect in terms of the next regulatory aspect that came, which is especially the farm laws, right? I mean, one thing that I find very fascinating is that with the whole farm laws that came in, it almost made one part of the whole WDR registration. I mean, the whole aspect invalidated, because when the concept of trade zones came in, you're saying that there's no concept of negotiability, right? Because no, any place where you could do the trading becomes a so there is almost a massive change that are happening there. So from the standpoint of NCML, and from your understanding now, with all the the heat and the discussion that have happened, how do you think the farmers have impacted the warehousing industry? And I've seen your earlier discussions about it, but maybe if you could just maybe overall summarize your thoughts on it, maybe then we can get into specifics also.
So, my initial thought was that somewhere bringing the three laws together was an error,
Mm-hmm.
because two of those three laws really don't. I mean, funnily enough, one of the three laws, which was the storage control orders,
Mm,
uh, the first ones to actually the while the law may have been whatever, the first one to actually go back on it was the government itself.
mm.
It was started with
The
onions and now
onion,
with
yeah.
pulses and uh, you know uh, oil seeds and all that. So the point is that I think is a big dampener in this
Mm,
whole thing of build warehouses, and I'll tell you why. I was reviewing with my warehousing team yesterday in terms of our own performance, and they've said that one of the reasons that we are not getting the right kind of quantity into our warehouses is that people are scared of storing now
mm,
because of these storage limits and all that. So the point is that you can't be on one end giving funding for infrastructure and creating warehouses, and then once people start storing in them, you start confiscating the material. So there is a contradiction. I know the compulsions. I mean, in a separate engagement or conversation, I've actually said that in this whole food price rally that has happened globally,
mm,
some of the actions that the Indian government has taken have actually worked. And
mm,
if it weren't for those actions, particularly in pulses and all that, we could have had significantly higher prices here.
mm,
So those are needed, but I mean, the challenge is getting that balance right, and that is, I mean, and that was done. I think even in the case of pulses, the government came out with one order initially, then went back, and so that is one law which wasn't really about the farmers; it was about trade.
mm,
And if it was decoupled from that, it may not have even got affected. I
mm,
mean, the trade was very happy to accept it. Farmer had no reason to not want it. It actually worked good for the farmer, because when people are buying to stock, the market should logically go up and the farmer should get a better realization. Today, when people are scared to stock or not wanting to stock, then the farmer basically ends up carrying that inventory. So at a macro level, it works better for the farmer, but because it was clubbed, it came under this opposition. Similarly, for contract laws, the I don't know what, I mean, don't recall the exact term that was used for this law, but the contract farming law,
mm,
there is this typically would not happen for broad acre crops. I mean, no one does a contract farming of wheat or paddy or corn or whatever. These are for very specific crops. A lot of that in the fruit and vegetable space, or specific grains. I mean, we are seeing and we need that, because if we want more millets to be produced, more traditional grains to be produced, the farmer needs to have the comfort of a confirmed buyer at their end
mm,
to actually be encouraged to do this. So from that perspective, and I don't think anybody can arm twist the farmer into signing a contract which they don't like. I mean, there can be exceptions. I'm not saying that everyone is as good or as bad, but the point is that that was something which was a need-based farmer industry interaction or farmer trade interaction that would have taken place. So these two laws actually needn't have come under the spotlight and could have gone through easily because they really didn't mean harm for anyone. Or I mean, at least one should not have been perceived as causing harm to anyone, right? And the farm laws are really about I mean, if you look at how much mandi fee is collected, it will tell you that the largest participant in the mandi system is the government itself,
State, yeah. State
right?
governments.
So at the local level, I mean, a lot of trade is happening outside the mandis. I mean, at the private level, right? So the what is lost in this is that typically you had to pay a mandi fee within a certain area of I mean, a geographical area, and now you can go and buy without paying that fee from wherever you want to buy it and all that. I mean, earlier, if you wanted to buy at your factory, you would need to get a mandi license there, or you would get the permission from the local mandi to buy there. And every day you would pay a mandi fee to say that, okay, so much was transacted, and this is my fee for the mandi there. Now you don't have to pay that. So somewhere the cost of doing business for the farmer will go down. And so the positive is what and it is not as if the corporates will be rushing in there to be buying from the farmers, because it's not easy. I mean, the reality is that the farmer in India is too small. So you will need aggregators. Today, the Adatyas or the mandi traders or the local traders are the aggregators. And large corporates or who want to go and buy large quantities are going to resort or reconnect with these aggregators to be buying. I mean, just as the government does. I mean, government is the biggest buyer of agriculture produce, and the most efficient agriculture produce procurement, which happens in Punjab and Haryana, is because there are efficient aggregators, and there's a cost that is paid for that service that they are providing. And while we may criticize them, the reality is that in the last 2 years, it has been evident both the times when COVID struck, it was during the peak Rabi harvest, and Government of India was able to procure all the grain that it wanted in 45 days because there was a very efficient system which had existed to do that. So the thing is that the farm laws also have to be seen as where they are bringing value, and what exactly is the downside of enacting them. And I don't think it is universal applicability across the country. There'll be regions which will benefit from these farm laws, and there'll be activities which may actually suffer from the enactment of these laws.
Yeah, and I think you made a very insightful point in terms of paying with the local mandis, right? Paying fees there, because in one way, the whole question of price management is a very tricky aspect here, because in the farm laws there is almost a one line which says that the government may set up a price discovery system, information system, right? I mean, it almost sounded like an RFP for the whole document when it's written that way, and you did talk about also NCML setting up their price management information system. So
Right.
I'm curious, how do you see this happening at a macro scale? Like, because you have NCML, which is like, you talked about in your own market yard how you're connecting data from various mandis and setting up the price information system. But the central question comes in is, like, today a large part of the trade bases their price based on mandi price, and then they set their rates. So in that case, when with the post farm laws, how do you see this price management happening there? Do you see it still happening where depending on whosoever has the maximum information database, they setting up their own price exchange, and they're going in there at a slightly dynamic level? Or how do you see price management coming, changing in the new
No,
years?
so that will be very critical, and the reason, and more than the trade, I think it will be a big headache for the government, because when they do their inflation measures, I mean, they have a pattern, or they know where to get the prices from, and once these prices become a free for all, it will be difficult to keep track of where things are trading. But yeah, so the price discovery mechanism, even where there is a private trade happening today, which is goods that don't go to the mandi. So, 17 years ago, Cargill had set up a procurement center. I mean, had a private procurement center. We had these farm gate procurement centers across North India. And the farmer was, we had mandi licenses, and the farmer was encouraged to come and sell his produce to Kargil at the warehouses that we were based out of. So how would the farmer decide whether he wanted to come to us or not? He would check the mandi prices, right? And say that, okay, if these guys are opening a price which is equivalent to the mandi, maybe adjust it for the fact that I don't have to go to the mandi, or I will get my payment in 24 hours or whatever. So our selling point was really about proximity to the farmer and the payment certainty in a specific period of time. Now that again is something that will. So you need the mandis for that ref check, if one may say. And the other part is that this will also have to work with the whole financing mechanism, because today what happens is that who's financing the farmer? It is the Alatya, who's a large part of the farm finance is happening through the Alatya. Now, Alatya actually keeps an eye on when the farmer is going to sell his crop, so that he stands at his door. He either goes and buys the crop from the farmer, or he goes keeps an eye on when the farmer is selling the crop, and therefore goes back to collect his money. Now, if the farmer starts going and selling his money left, right, when selling his crop left, right, center to platforms and here and there without the Alatya knowing, the Alatya will actually be concerned about lending money. And so for this system to work, more organized financing of the farmer also has to come into play.
Yeah, and I think that's where one facet we are seeing it with the collateral management players, right? I mean, where they are almost moving into a structured trade finance there, right? So that do you think that can really stand up?
So that is a space that needs to be encouraged, because collateral management that is happening today. So I'll give you an example. When COVID happened, and the mandis were closed, right? So the farmer didn't have the opportunity to go to the mandi, and we had mandi licenses in a few of our warehouses in Rajasthan, Gujarat, Orissa, and we created this concept called the Surakshit Mandi, where and we actually enlisted the Alatyas in the region, and said that you go and convince the farmers to come to our warehouse, and we will test and auction his crop here on our platform. And so the farmer, and because it was COVID and that social distancing and all that, we actually through SMS and Alatya's coordination got the queuing of the farmers done. So the farmer knew exactly when he had to come to the warehouse, where his material would be tested, and NCML being the testing agency, and put onto that market yard platform and we were at our end, we were encouraging the buyers to come in and buy. And because we were doing it in a warehouse, if the farmer didn't like the price on the day, he had the option to leave his crop in the warehouse for 7 days, right? So what it did was that, if you see from a mandi perspective, the farmer takes his crop to the mandi, which would be on a tractor trolley. I remember days when he used to come on his bullock carts and all that. And if he didn't, if his material didn't come up for bidding the same day, he would sleep on that trolley or bullock cart or cook his food there itself. Maybe if he didn't like the price, he didn't have an option, he would say, I might as well sell and go back home, or I'll be sitting here for the next 3 days waiting for the price and all that. So somewhere all those practices can be, I would say, made more farmer friendly through people trading on these platforms, through linkages to warehouses. But there will be a role for the middleman, because at the end of the day, he is the one who actually stays close to the farmer even today. And while we may reduce his role, I think we should not rush in to eliminate that role, because the farmer at an individual level is a very small entity, and to aggregate those farmers at a local level is going to be extremely cost intensive, as well as risk prone for the industry to step in.
Yeah, and this has been a pet peeve for me for a long time. It's like we've been agri-tech worlds have been talking about removing middlemen for a very long time, and now most of them are coming to terms with the fact that yes, the middlemen are playing a very vital role in the ecosystem.
Absolutely.
But I want to tie it back to the earlier question we brought about price management, right? So now, with the within an NCML context, with the amount of price management system with your marketyard.com platform, are you able to you see data coming in that is showing you how the impact, the amount of extent of involvement of middlemen is coming down?
So no, I don't think the involvement of middlemen is really coming down. I would say where it is coming down. It is coming down probably in the fresh space, where the fruits and vegetables and companies are going, because those are smaller scales. But in the grain space, and even in to a large extent in, I mean, this is a conversation I've had recently with people who are working with farmers for, or actually apple and, in Himachal and Kashmir particularly. And they said that the only thing the sellers there know is Azadpur Mandi, right? So, I mean, someone has to go there and show them a different world. But so far, they are still, I mean, their world, sort of, when it comes to selling, still begins and ends with Azadpur Mandi. So that is gradually changing, with a lot of startups getting, and, particularly the retail linked origination businesses, which will, so the fresh space is seeing more change than the cereal or the grain space.
Okay. Yeah, and I think you're talking about retailing discovery there, right? And which is also, to me, is linked with the whole aspect of today. One good reason why I think WDRA is talking about creating a national warehousing grid is to solve fundamentally an information asymmetry problem.
Absolutely.
At an intent level, right? Because fundamentally, it's like the 37% rule they say in real estate, right? Like, how do you decide a house when you've seen 37% of the choices, is what they say in mathematical terms. So in a certain question, the fundamental question remains is, given an informal 90% unorganized warehousing space, the whole aspect of comes in as to how would we then find out the amount of stocks that is being held by the private, and which is going to be having the bare impact in the local maximas of the market, right? So we did discuss in terms of how WDA is not failing in there. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, how do you see then the alternatives are? Like, in what way do we then get a sense of the entire extent of the stock, or is that even necessary, do you see, to really solve this information asymmetry problem?
No, so I'm actually a supporter of WDRA, which will, if done right, solve a lot of these problems. And my concern is that while there is consistent sort of support for WDRA, saying that, okay, we should engage and we should have every warehouse go there, but we are not trying to understand why people are not doing it. And I don't think it's such a difficult problem. I mean, it is saying that, okay, we just can't say that, okay, this is the rule and that's the only way we will do, and even if we don't get what we want to get or achieve the objectives, rather than that, I would say that understand why things are not happening, because a good concept failing or not delivering the anticipated or expected results is a simple problem, because you can actually rework the equation, so to say. But if we are not doing that, then we are actually harming ourselves. I mean, I would love to have a system where everyone knows where are the warehouses, where are the spaces available, because at the end of the day, we actually have surplus formal or organized storage capacity in the country, and the impression that seems to go around is that India needs more storage.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where the major point we were talking earlier, right? We have a lot more storage, but it's an orchestrating the dynamics where with the demand and the supply is where we are struggling in. So maybe let me rephrase the earlier question differently. How would you relook at the whole regulation aspect of WDRA differently, given the view that you're holding right there? So is there a particular change that you would like to recommend here?
So to start with, and this is to encourage the large companies to be part of it. So it is, as I mentioned, I mean, if I am running 700 to 800 warehouses across the country, do I need 800 WDRA registrations? Right? I mean, why would one registration not work? I mean, for me, it's a lot of paperwork everywhere, right? And a cost everywhere, right? So that way you will be able to segregate the big and the small. So that is one level of differentiation you create. Then you obviously have once you've got everyone in the hook, you then put standards on what warehouses should be like. Some of them are absolutely, and why I'm concerned about the quality of warehouses is because that has a significant impact on the crop quality. I mean, you have crop deterioration, aflatoxin, there's that different crops, and people only focus on the rate when they're putting the material in, but what they don't bear in mind is the deterioration in the crop. So that is one. The second is that this whole registration cost, uh, who bears it, needs to be understood. And WDRAs will actually, I mean, the WDRA registration will find more takers if the banks start accepting or enforcing that as part of their lending conditions. But someone will have to bear that cost, which the banks today are not willing to bear. So that again becomes a contentious issue.
Yeah, and that's where, with the banks coming in, then NBFCs came in to see if they can fit in there, and now with NBFCs are also pulling back because
Correct.
of their own challenges there. And so now you have a newer set of players who is charging a slightly higher interest rates, but at the same time ensuring that the cost of borrowing gets low higher.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I think so. Collateral management, warehousing, and lending.
Mm.
So sorry to put it, warehousing, funding, and collateral management have to be looked at together.
Mm.
And I would say not warehousing. I would say storage and preservation.
Mm. 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 Yeah. 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 It kind of makes sense. Yeah. Mm. Interesting. So I'll tackle to the next part of the whole discussion. That is, you talked about the national. Recently, you wrote an op-ed about national logistics policy. Uh, so in India, which is an extension of the whole this dialogue that we've been having, that the logistics is completely also, barring a few players, it is largely unorganized and so maybe let me rephrase it this way. What would be your ideal wish list in terms of a national logistics policy that would be more aligned with the how the warehousing and or the storage and preservation space is evolving in there? How do you see the logistics adapting itself in a more ideal way? Let's put it. That would furthermore add a multiplier effect with the changes that are happening in the warehousing space.
So yeah, I mean, what we've looked at it, and we also have a third-party logistic business where we do
Hmm.
trucking for people. What we've seen is that in agriculture, logistics business typically has worked well. Organized logistics business has worked for long hauls
Hmm.
uh, because there is a greater value in that. The unorganized logistics business is typically the short haul business,
Hmm.
and there the size varies. So there is, I mean, when I look at the agriculture side, there are three elements. One is moving the product or produce from the farmer to the mandis, from the mandis to the warehouse or the factory of the processor or the buyer, and that is a space which I think there is an opportunity for
Hmm.
getting it organized, and getting it organized not just with the road transport, but to get a national coverage, a road and rail connectivity. I mean, the whole combination of the two is where the opportunity lies. I think no organized player has, I mean, Concor has done this job well, and
Hmm.
I think companies have gotten agreement with Concor to move their produce, and that is working well. And that actually is a good model to
Hmm.
emulate for what a good policy can be, where there is a nationwide uh, service provider with the investment in the assets, and there is a user, and they come together. So in the challenge for the logistics for agriculture in particular has been that the user is very small. At least one side of the user is very
Hmm.
small or not as big, and therefore is of not significant interest to the large players in the agri sector, in the logistics sector. So therefore, the small guys or the unorganized logistics sector continues to be the go-to sort of
Hmm.
service provider for the agri space.
Hmm. Yeah. No, and the unorganized, and another aspect which is sort of also very interesting from an unorganized place is that today a large part of the taxation is also very convoluted, right? And you have mentioned in your conversations around bringing in maybe a 5% of GST on warehousing there.
Hmm.
So, and now with the current political government talking a lot about one nation, one tax, and talking about simplifying the agriculture taxation, what would be your ideal wish list from a taxation perspective with respect to simplifying? I mean, because we know that, right, almost every state has a different law. So for a trader who is to do manage this entire thing, it's a fairly a mess. And I know that a lot of
Yeah.
startups are also trying to solve that, right? So, but from policy perspective, at a taxation level, how do you see this could to add, to sort of at least unmessify things a little bit more?
No, so I mean, we've been advocating this for a while that the whole. I mean, storage is GST free. I mean, there's
Hmm.
no tax on that, and we've been saying that storage services need to be brought under the GST ambit and charged a certain fee,
Hmm.
because storage is not just about a warehouse. It is about storage, the whole the system inside the warehouse, the preservation, the movement,
Hmm.
the labor in and labor out, loading, unloading. And if those are not, then that is where things are falling between the cracks. I mean, it is making the whole exercise more expensive.
Hmm.
And also it is actually, if we bring it in the tax ambit, then there will be a greater awareness of what exists there.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, but what are your thoughts on? I mean, in terms of because today every state has their own trading there. There is a whole talk also at a slightly structural level in terms of replicating what GST did from an
Hmm.
agricultural standpoint, right? So would you also see any ideal changes that you would like to see in terms of simplifying that?
No, so today, frankly speaking, the tax element has, I mean, this whole, one produce, one market, and all that is already in place. I mean, today that is
Hmm.
much simpler from a procurement perspective. So
Hmm.
if a large company wants to, I mean, forget procurement. 15 years ago, the decision making on where to build a plant was based on the tax
Hmm.
consideration, right? So that to a certain extent has been reduced or taken away. Right, today you would go where your best economics come, and so to that, to a large extent, that problem has been solved. Now the question comes that, okay, the differences still exist because they are mandi fees. I mean,
Hmm.
the challenge with a state like Punjab is that with the high mandi fees,
Hmm.
nobody wants to procure from there. So if we want to diversify crops in Punjab,
Hmm.
who would come and buy it there?
Hmm. Hmm.
So the states have to now, and that is where the farm laws will probably come into play, where it will help equalize that differentiation that the local level taxation has made doing business more expensive some places relative to the others.
Yeah, and that's what we see some glimpses of it in the Orissa model, and I
Hmm.
think maybe some of those could really be
Right.
a starting point for
Point.
seeing if we can implement this and across different states as well.
Absolutely.
Mm. So, I think we've discussed a lot more in the whole areas of warehousing there, but a slightly more personal question here. So, coming from from a player with Cargill and with NCML, and now I was almost looking at one of your older interviews where you talked about how Cargill came out of the input business and in the back in the early days, right? And now with the they have launched their digital Sati program. So how do you see this this whole dynamics from your experience being in the from the government side of things, like you had to spend time in STC, and now you're in the private. How do you see the landscape changing personally for you in terms of the agriculture? Do you see a lot more openness at the administrative bureaucrat for private players to come in, and what's like the climate like?
So no, of course, a lot has changed. I mean, I've been through. I mean, I say that I've been a participant, witness, and an enabler of a lot of things that have happened. I mean, one has fought for various laws to be changed and altered. But today, I think most of the regulatory hurdles have been taken away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, storage control order is one of them, but
Mm-hmm.
you had similar local level things. Companies are, I mean, today the growth of food processing industry, the investment that is coming in, and I talk about food processing industry because and this is the piece I mentioned to you earlier about agribusiness, because at the end of the day, it is not just about producing something well; it needs to reach the right market, and the food processing industry then becomes the carrier of the produce to the consumer. And the challenge that I see there still is that the whole sort of science around processed food,
Mm-hmm.
because while the developed world has made their journey and come to a point to say, okay, this is not good or not good enough, India is still kind of evolving, and we've obviously set the right rules in place in terms of rating our food, whether the whole concept of red, green, yellow. or whatever in terms of processed food. So we have to find that balance between encouraging food processing and ensuring right food consumption. And that is where some of our traditional foods come into play, and those crops therefore become important. So whether it is the millets, whether it is this whole I mean, there is a lot of conversation around alternate proteins now. So these are things which 15 years ago weren't thought about as some things which were going to be possible. But I think today the industry, the consumer, and the farmer are gradually getting to connect with each other better than they have over the years. And I think that is good news for the farmer. And I think it will certainly help the consumer. We are obviously being influenced by world trends, whether it is on identity preservation, people wanting to know where their food is coming from, this whole thing of kind of packaging, the sustainability impact. So I think the people who are coming into this business now are coming with a lot more awareness of what is going to be holding good for them from a long-term perspective, rather than just doing an what I can do today to make a quick buck. So the whole I would say moving of food and agriculture from just a trade activity to an industry activity is which is become bringing the organization as well as more order, and I think a brighter future for the whole sort of agriculture to food value chain.
No, and also, you're and also another aspect here is that for long period of time, the food processing industry was also borrowing a lot of standards from the West and other countries, like it be the FTA and all of that. So now with what you're rightly pointing out with respect to the traditional foods, I think some of these standards are also have to change. Like for instance, the amount of preservatives which is there from an Indian context is the non-Indian context is very different.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
so do you see
No,
that
so
those changes also happening there?
this is I mean, when you see multinationals including Indian cuisines in their sort of portfolios, it is an acknowledgement of the fact that there is when I was more in the food space, one of the things was that we don't have to bring foreign foods into India. We have to learn to commercialize retaining the taste and the sentiment around traditional foods in a commercial manner. So whether it is about eating an idli at home versus ordering an idli, or making an idli which is as good as what you get from outside. So and same with the dal or the everything else, and that I think technology has enabled, and that is where the need for local ingredients continues, as well as and that goes back to saying that okay, the farmer can produce what the market needs. I mean, I'm seeing this with ragi, I'm seeing this with other millets, where there are companies which are actually promoting those sort of crops, the traditional crops, for their health and nutrition benefits. And that is something which is actually going to be good, purely from a diversification of agriculture. Pulses is another space, and we've talked about. I mean, I mentioned about smart proteins and those other things.
Yeah, and that's where some of these, even in the alternative proteins, the amount of traditional foods that have been, like you talk about moringa or so many
Absolutely.
other things, right? So I think there is a huge lot of potential that is available there, and also we I think we have to also learn through the lessons of branding also from that sense, right? We haven't really
Absolutely.
properly done a good job of branding these products as well.
No, no, but it is happening now. Again, I mean, I like this whole idea of the risk capital coming into the space, because it gives you a little more, what I would call it, runway to take chances and take bold decisions and bold calls. And if a decent number of them come good, I think we would be much better off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's the hope that which we see that these changes are coming in there, because today, I see, like we talking about Mahua beers and traditional toddies also being now going through reinvention, and one just hopes that these brands develop their own markets and we develop in there. So yeah, I mean, I've almost come to the end of this conversation there. Maybe just to closing comments there, how does your life do you do when you look at this whole changes of at an agriculture level there, right? Do you do you see these? How do you see this? The long end there. Do you see this
So I'm
scenario?
very optimistic about what lies ahead. I think we have come a long way and we are moving in the right direction. We see, and that is being validated by the capital that is coming into this space, the engagement of the large companies that already existed, getting closer to agriculture, to good food,
Mm.
and I think that augurs very well for this for our country and our population. We've joined this food party late than the Western world, but uh, because we joined late, we have had the benefit of seeing their challenges or the outcomes of their efforts, so that we can
And we
design
don't
our
need to
own.
intensify also.
Right. So we can design our own food systems which are healthier and which are, I mean, healthier from a perspective of the consumer, but which also provides greater opportunity and payback to the farmers,
Mm.
the producers of those. And of course, there is the value of the supply chain. If I have a concern, it is that today we are getting a lot of capital based on a lot of promise, and the stories that are being sold uh, about the future.
Mhm.
I would just sort of bring in a bit of caution there, which is saying that it would be a tragedy if we don't make it right and lose trust of that capital, because that will set us back significantly. And if you have to say that, okay, what is the goal that, and this has been said before, and I've said it before myself, that at the end of the day, from an agriculture perspective, we are today, the Indian farmer buys everything in retail and sells in wholesale. We need to reverse that equation. And that would make agriculture more productive and enticing and remunerative. And on the other hand, I think we need that investment in technology to produce and market the good food, the right food, and that combination of a productive farmer and an efficient and a nutritious food producer will be a good combination for this whole ag economy. The other piece I would add is that I don't think we've made enough efforts in exporting food or produce from India. And while we've had an approach of saying that, okay, rice goes and sugar goes and government subsidizes some, I think an opportunity lies in taking a lot of Indian food to the world. And that is, of course, that is not going to be happening only on some company taking that initiative.
Mm.
We have to look at our country as a country brand. I mean, we've got table mangoes, table guavas, and various things. We've had grapes as a success story. So we need to be linking up to the world, because I think we have products which will be in demand in the world. So the future is bright. We have to approach it in the right manner, keeping the interest of the farmer, consumer, and the supply chain that exists in between.
Great. Maybe. I mean, you just mentioned briefly about your the concerns, and maybe could you add a little bit more on what are the promises that you find slightly difficult to
So it is like,
match, reconcile with reality?
so when we talk about getting more, reaching out to so many farmers, going to
Mm.
be doing this, going to be doing that, and I'm sure a lot of it would be done. So I'm not saying that anyone is telling a lie, but typically, when you have a lot of people over promising and under delivering,
Mm.
that is where the trust is lost, and that is something that, as a promoter, as an investor, we all need to be ensuring that trust or the optimism that is being sold for the economy of the ag sector in this country is to a large extent brought to fruition, rather than be a bad experience for people. And we've had cases of different sectors in the past where we've seen this.
Mm. Yeah, and I think tempering that optimism with the with the ground realities, and there are a lot of movements now having. I mean, I was when you were talking about the food man, I was reminded of how Olam is now split into their with their food ingredients business, and then
Right.
they're going for the IPO. So in a certain sense, these are probably signs where and they're also moving away, and they've sold off all the sugar businesses, right?
Hmm.
So which is in a sense an indicator of how the tailwinds of the market are moving in towards in that direction.
Yes, sir. I mean, I've seen large corporations, even a company like Cargill, kind of moved from being
Mm.
just an ag trader to a food processor. And in India, we have also a consumer brand for food. So we have, companies are moving up and down that value chain, because the reality is that given the price volatility, the seasonality, the government policies, the value keeps shifting between places in this value chain. And so large people, companies can afford to be there. Everyone else probably has to make choices.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting point in terms of the value keeps shifting. I mean, I'm reminded of when Cargill exited from its seed input business, and now with digital Sati, they're talking about inputs in coming into it, right? Which is offering
Right.
inputs and then
Right.
doing through the whole full cycle. So, in a certain sense, that's a very tangible way of saying that how the value is evolving, and it's a great
Absolutely.
opportunity that way. I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation,
My
Siraj.
pleasure. My pleasure.
It was wonderful, and I hope the people who tuned in, I'm hearing a lot of people who tuned in there, but I don't see questions coming in there. So maybe now is the time. Maybe we could open up for some questions there. So maybe if people could post questions here, we could address them there. Just let me just check if there are some questions have come in so far
Sure.
there. Yeah.
Yep.
So yes. Yeah, so I think most of the questions or comments that have been coming in about this whole dialogue there. So
Right.
I'll share those questions when the people post them in these forums and
Yeah.
threads later point. Thank you so much
Sure.
for
No,
this
at all.
dialogue.
Lovely being with you, and thank you for hosting me.
My pleasure. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.